In today's world, technology has brought the environments of video games to a whole new level. With design engines such as the Frostbite 3 engine, video game designers are able to create hyper-realistic environments that players can truly interact with. The evolution of science fiction video game environments, from the first video game that was created to where the environments stand today, has significantly changed over time, to the point that today, science fiction video games, such as Mass Effect, Andromeda, have created environments that are hard to distinguish from real-world environments, such as open-world concepts and realistic qualities of natural environments, that the graphics of these environments work to create a science fiction world that looks as if it could be as real as reality. Video game environments didn't start with hyper-realistic graphics for their environments. Hyperrealism in video games was developed over decades as they evolved into where they are today. The first game that was ever The first game that was ever made was called Tennis for Two. It was created by a man named William Higginbotham in 1958 using an analog vacuum tube computer. As you can see in the video, the first real video game environment was the side view of a tennis court where a ball was bounced from one side of the screen to the other. The 1970s to the 1980s brought about better graphics than Tennis for Two with better 2D environments that began with 8-bit computing. 8-bit only shows a two-dimensional view of a landscape and is considered a flat environment because the environment only shows one side. The game, Cavern of Mars, is an example of a 2D, flat environment as it only shows the spaceship moving through the caverns from a flat point of view to the player. The 1980s to the 1990s brought a new version of the 2D environments that gave more detail to the flat environment that it was showing. In the game Phantasy Star, it can be seen that although it is still a 2D environment that only shows one side of the environment, that more detail has been added to the buildings with the ability to make out the texture of the buildings and the floor. There is also detail added to the natural environment, with the inclusion of grass and trees. Although you can make out the trees, grass, and building textures, there still isn't a truly realistic quality about them. The 32-bit gaming experience after the 1990s brought about 3D or three-dimensional gaming. With the 3D technology, environments became more interactive to the players, yet it only allowed the player to move within a controlled space that was set by the game designer. Alien Trilogy is a 32-bit game that shows how the environment became interactive to the player. The player in this video is able to open doors and move freely within the confines set by the game designer. The video shows how that with 32-bit gaming, environments began to look more realistic as well as feel more realistic. There is more definition to the building that the player is moving in and the movement of the environment, such as when the door opens shows a realistic movement on the environment. 64-bit gaming brought about the beginning of hyperrealism. Environments began to take on more of a hyper-realistic quality with 64-bit gaming, where the environment is well defined to the player. For instance, in Domination, the environment is more defined for the player. It contains graphics that are more realistic, such as the natural elements. In the video, the natural surrounding of the landscape such as the trees, the reflection on the water, and the grass, holds some form of a realistic quality. Even the vehicle looks as though it has some form of realism. But in today's world, we have better design engines that have surpassed the 64-bit gaming design, and one such engine is the Frostbite 3 engine that created Mass Effect Andromeda. With today's technology, we see environments that have open-world concepts that hold a simulated reality. Players are easily able to stray from missions within the game to explore the environment and take in the realism that has been created by the game designers. Players can even interact with the environment, climbing cliffs and mountains without barriers set by game designers as they were back in older style games. With free-range movement, the environment not only looks real, but feels real as well. In these pictures, you can see the realism of the environments that can be created within video games today. In the picture of Mass Effect Andromeda on the right, you can see that the landscape holds a realistic quality. The picture of the Deseret Towers in Utah on the left show how the real world is just as comparable to the fantasy worlds that can be created within games. In this exploitative gameplay, it can be seen that buildings, vehicles, and the natural environment hold a realistic quality that can be compared to the real world. Game designers want players to feel the world around them and to be able to feel like they are exploring a real world that they wouldn't be able to explore in real life. In this environment, the buildings or shipping containers in this video are created with such hyper-realistic qualities that the player can even make out the rust spots that the containers have and the texture of how weathered the container is. When the car emerges in the video, the player is able to see that the car moves and feels like a car that could be driven in the real world. Although this car is also meant to be futuristic, the details of the car make it look like a car that can be bought at a dealership today. In terms of the natural setting, the view of the desert-like setting and the cliffs and mountains that are shown hold a realistic quality that seems as though it is a place that can be visited. Today's gaming environments have significantly changed from past environments. With the start of 2D graphics to 3D graphics, to where we are today, gaming environments have changed to give the player a hyper-realistic feel to the environment, created players that can become immersed in the graphics of what seem to a real world.